My name is Eliza Vance, and for most of my 36 years, I've worked with the earth. As a landscape architect in Portland, my job is to find the hidden potential in a patch of land, to see the grace in a wild-growing vine, the quiet strength in an old stone wall, the way light filters through the leaves of a Japanese maple. I shape gardens, parks, and quiet courtyards, creating spaces where people can breathe. It's a peaceful life, one I built for myself, piece by piece, like one of my own designs. But the foundation of who I am wasn't laid in the city. It was set long ago, on the shores of Serenity Lake, in a small, weathered cabin my grandfather built with his own hands. Every June, from the time I was 6 until I was 16, I would pack a duffel bag with books and worn-out jeans and take the bus 2 hours east into the Cascades, to Stillwater Cottage. Those summers were my sanctuary, a world away from the polite, crowded silence of our suburban home. My younger sister, Chloe, 5 years my junior, sometimes came for a weekend, but she found the woods boring and the lake too quiet. She craved the bright lights of slumber parties and the constant hum of them all. Chloe was a firefly, brilliant and captivating, always drawing the eye. I was more like the moss on the north side of the trees, quiet, unassuming, and perfectly content in the shade. Our parents, Eleanor and Richard, orbited Chloe. They celebrated her effortless charm, her social triumphs, her vibrant energy. My achievements, a scholarship, a design award, were met with a pleased nod, an expectation fulfilled. I wasn't unloved, not exactly, but I was the low-maintenance child, the one who was expected to understand, to be reasonable, to not need so much. It was a role I accepted without question, because I had my grandfather, Arthur. At Stillwater, I was seen. Arthur Vance was a man of few words and gifted hands. A retired luthier, he'd spent his life coaxing music from wood, and he saw the world with a craftsman's patience. He taught me how to identify birds by their song, how to properly plane a piece of wood until it was smooth as silk, and how to sit on the dock at dusk and simply listen to the world settle. He called the cottage his anchor, and for me, it became the same. Every corner of that place holds a memory, the faint scent of cedar and sawdust in his workshop, the worn patch on the armchair where he read to me, the specific creak of the third step on the porch. He was the one who noticed I'd stopped painting in high school and bought me a new set of watercolors without a word. He was the one who read my college application essays and told me they sounded like me, which he meant as the highest compliment. And when I graduated with my degree, it was Arthur who framed my diploma in a beautiful piece of hand-carved maple. 6 years ago, Arthur passed away. His decline was slow, and the grief was a quiet, lingering ache. When his lawyer, Mr. Davison, gathered us to read the will, I expected the cottage to be sold, the proceeds divided. But when he reached that section, his voice softened. To my granddaughter, Eliza Vance, he read, who has always understood that the truest beauty is found in stillness, and that a home is measured not in square feet but in memories, I leave Stillwater Cottage and all its contents, solely and completely. A heavy silence filled the room. I felt a wave of profound, heart-wrenching gratitude wash over me. He had seen me, right to the very end. But the feeling was fleeting, replaced by the chill emanating from my family. My mother, Eleanor, forced a tight, bright smile. "Well, that's just like him," she said, her voice brittle. "You were always his favorite." My father, Richard, stared at a spot on the wall. "That property is worth a small fortune. It should have been divided equally. That would have been the fair thing to do." Chloe, however, didn't bother with subtlety. "The whole thing?" "Just for her?" she asked, her arms crossed tightly. "I spent time there, too. I have memories there." My voice was quiet, almost apologetic. "I didn't ask for this, Chloe. I had no idea. We can all still go up there, whenever you want." She just scoffed and turned away. The drive back to Portland was suffocatingly silent. That night, in my small apartment, I found the leather-bound journal Arthur had given me for my 18th birthday. Inside the cover, in his elegant script, He'd written, "Eliza, should the world ever make you feel small, come back to the water. The trees will remember your name. I built this place for peace. I hope you always find yours here." He must have known. He must have sensed that a day would come when I would need something that was unequivocally mine, a place that couldn't be negotiated or diminished. But his gift, intended as a sanctuary, had instead drawn a line in the sand, exposing a fault line in my family that I never knew ran so deep. The resentment simmered just beneath the surface of every polite conversation, a quiet poison. Stillwater Cottage was my inheritance, but I was beginning to realize it would come at a cost I hadn't yet begun to calculate. Life, on the surface, settled back into its familiar rhythm. I poured myself into my work, finding solace in the logic of root systems and the patient art of coaxing life from soil. The cottage remained my refuge, a place I'd retreat to every few months to clear my head, repair a leaky faucet, and walk the trails Arthur and I had worn into the forest floor. The tension with my family remained, a low hum of unspoken grievances, but we managed a fragile peace. Then, a few months later, Chloe announced her engagement. Her fiancé, Julian Croft, was the son of a prominent financial consultant in Seattle, a man whose name was often mentioned in the business section of the newspaper. Julian was handsome, polished, and exuded the easy confidence of someone who had never wanted for anything. He worked for his father's firm, drove a silver German sedan, and spoke about his family's annual ski trips to Aspen as if they were a mundane chore. Chloe was ecstatic, transformed. The engagement had happened on a yacht in the San Juan Islands at sunset. The ring, a diamond the size of a hazelnut, was practically a lighthouse beacon on her slender finger. My parents were beside themselves with pride. This was the match they had always dreamed of for her. The wedding planning began almost immediately, and it was less a plan than a full-scale military operation. Chloe envisioned an event that would be talked about for years. They booked an exclusive vineyard in the Willamette Valley, a sprawling estate with rolling hills, a Michelin-starred caterer, and a guest list that topped 200. Her dress was being custom-made in Milan. A string octet was hired for the ceremony, to be replaced by a 12-piece band for the reception. Julian insisted on a professional videography team with drones to capture what Chloe called the whole epic narrative of the day. I sat through planning dinners feeling like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. I wasn't jealous this world of performative luxury had never appealed to me, but I felt a growing sense of alienation. Every conversation revolved around floral arrangements, calligraphed invitations, and debates over the precise shade of ivory for the linens. One evening, I took Chloe out for dinner, hoping to find a quiet moment to connect with my sister beneath the bridal frenzy. Over salmon and Chardonnay, I broached the subject carefully. "This all sounds incredible, Chloe, but it must be getting expensive. I can't contribute much, but I'd like to give you something. Maybe help with the photographer, or the flowers. I could offer $5,000. Chloe looked at me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, followed by a small, dismissive laugh. "Eliza, that's sweet, but we're fine. Julian's parents are covering a large portion, and Mom and Dad are handling the rest. We don't need your donation." The word stung. "It's not a donation. It's a gift. I just wanted to help." "And it's a lovely thought," she said, flagging down the waiter for more water, her attention already drifting. "But honestly, it's all taken care of. Don't worry about it." Something about her breezy confidence felt off. "Are you sure it's not too much for Mom and Dad?" "This all seems. They have a plan," she cut in smoothly. "Dad said he's got it all figured out. A financial strategy." The phrase financial strategy echoed in my mind long after we'd said goodbye. My parents were comfortable, but they weren't wealthy. My father was a mid-level manager at a paper company, my mother a part-time administrator at a private school. I remembered how they'd stretched to pay for Chloe's private tennis lessons and the European backpacking trip she'd taken after college, while I'd worked summer jobs to pay for my own textbooks. The idea of them having a strategy to fund a wedding that was inching toward $250,000 felt improbable. A few days later, I called my mother, ostensibly to ask about her garden but really to probe. When I gently mentioned the wedding costs, her response was vague and overly cheerful. "Oh, honey, don't you worry your pretty little head about that. Your father and I have it all under control. This is what parents do. We just want Chloe to have the perfect day. I just don't want you to put yourselves in a difficult position," I pressed. "Nonsense," she chirped. "Everything is fine. We have our ways." I hung up the phone with a knot of unease in my stomach. I felt dismissed, but also deeply unsettled. The venue alone had to be upwards of $50,000. The dress, the catering, the 3-week Italian honeymoon, the numbers didn't add up. I tried to push the feeling away, telling myself it wasn't my business. Maybe Julian's family was footing more of the bill than Chloe let on. Maybe my parents had investments I knew nothing about. But the seed of doubt had been planted. It was a tiny, persistent worry, and in the weeks to come, it would begin to sprout, pushing its way through the carefully cultivated soil of my denial. For now, though, the wedding juggernaut rolled on, a glittering spectacle of love and money, oblivious to the questions it left in its wake. The first tremor was so subtle I almost missed it. It was early spring, and the city was washed in that soft, pale green light of new leaves. I was feeling the familiar pull of the mountains, the need for the quiet solitude of the cottage. I called my mother on a Tuesday afternoon. "I think I'm going to head up to Stillwater this weekend," I told her. "The porch needs a new coat of sealant before the summer, and I could use the peace and quiet." There was a fractional pause on the other end of the line, just a beat of hesitation. "Oh, Eliza, there's no need to do that," she said, her voice suddenly a little too bright. "We actually took care of it. We hired a local handyman to go check on the place, fix a few things up. He said everything is in perfect shape." I was taken aback. "You hired someone?" "Yes. We just wanted to help out, save you the trip. You're so busy with work, and we know how much you worry about the upkeep." It was so out of character it was jarring. In the 6 years I'd owned the cottage, my parents had never once offered to help with its maintenance. They'd never offered to pay for a new water heater or help me clear fallen branches after a storm. Their sudden, proactive generosity felt less like a kindness and more like a deflection. Still, I let it go. Maybe they were trying to make amends for their behavior after the will reading. Maybe it was just an awkward attempt to be helpful. The second tremor came a week later and couldn't be so easily dismissed. I was walking home from a client meeting when my phone rang with an unknown number from an Oregon area code I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Later, while making tea in my kitchen, I listened to the message. "Eliza, dear, it's Helen Gable," a warm, familiar voice began. Mrs. Gable was my grandfather's closest neighbor at the lake, a retired librarian with a sharp mind and an even sharper eye for neighborhood happenings. "I hope I'm not being nosy, but I was so sorry we didn't get a chance to say a proper goodbye. I didn't realize you had sold the cottage. A lovely young couple from California bought it. They seem very nice, but it won't be the same without you and your grandfather's spirit around." My hand, holding a teacup, froze mid-air. Sold. My first thought was that she must be mistaken. Maybe new renters had moved in next door. Mrs. Gable wasn't one for gossip or confusion, but the alternative was unthinkable. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I called her back immediately. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm sorry if I've upset you," she said, her voice full of concern. "I just assumed it was your decision. The for sale sign was only up for a week or two, then the moving truck arrived last Tuesday. It all happened so fast." My throat went dry. "Mrs. Gable, I never put the house on the market." A long, weighty silence stretched across the line. "Well then, dear," she said finally, her tone grim. "I think you'd better come up here and take a look." After I hung up, a cold dread began to seep into my bones. I logged on to the county's property records website, my fingers fumbling on the keyboard. Every spring, I received the property tax bill in the mail. I realized with a jolt that it hadn't arrived this year. I'd been so preoccupied with a big project at work that I hadn't even noticed its absence. I typed in the address for Stillwater Cottage. The page loaded. And there it was, in stark, black and white digital print, owner, Miller, David, and Susan. Date of transfer, 6 weeks ago. Previous owner, Vance, Eliza. My breath hitched. Beneath that, another line, selling parties, Vance, Richard and Eleanor, on behalf of the Vance Family Trust. A family trust? We didn't have a family trust. My grandfather's will had been direct and simple. My mind racing, I opened my online banking portal. A security alert from 3 weeks prior, which I'd ignored as spam, now screamed at me. Unusual login detected from an IP address in Bend, Oregon. I had been in Portland that entire week. With a growing sense of nausea, I clicked on my transaction history. It wasn't the sale of the house I was looking for, but something else, something connected. And I found it. A series of 4 large transfers from a dusty, forgotten savings account I'd linked to my parents years ago, in case of an emergency. One transfer for $18,500 to a high-end bridal boutique in San Francisco. Another for $25,000 to Willamette Vineyard Estates. A third for $12,000 to a celebrity wedding photographer. The last, for $8,000, to an Italian travel agency specializing in luxury honeymoons. I sank into my kitchen chair, the screen of my laptop glowing in the dim light. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a well-intentioned mistake. This was a calculated, methodical theft. Someone had intercepted my mail, accessed my accounts, forged my name, and sold the one piece of the world that was truly mine. And I knew, with a certainty that felt like ice in my veins, exactly who had done it. The drive to Serenity Lake felt like a pilgrimage to a grave. The familiar turns in the road, the sight of the old general store, the crooked wooden sign for canoe rentals, it all felt alien, like scenes from someone else's life. The landscape that had always brought me a sense of peace now felt menacing. The tall pines lining the drive now seemed to stand like silent, mournful sentinels. When I turned onto the final gravel lane, my stomach clenched. The sign my grandfather had carved, the one that read Stillwater, was gone. In its place was a new, generic wooden plaque with the name Miller painted in cheerful blue letters. The wild tangle of lavender and echinacea I'd cultivated by the entrance had been replaced by a neat row of prim, manicured boxwoods. I parked the car and walked toward the cottage, my feet heavy. The front door, once a familiar faded blue, had been painted a glossy, impersonal black. A new, shiny brass lock with a keypad had replaced the old, simple knob whose particular stiffness I knew by heart. It was my house, but it felt like a stranger was wearing its clothes. Before I could bring myself to knock, the door swung open. A woman with kind eyes and a welcoming smile stood there, wiping her hands on an apron. A man with graying temples appeared behind her, holding a coffee mug. "Hello there," the woman said warmly. "You must be from the Henderson place down the road. We've been meaning to come say hi. I'm Susan Miller, and this is my husband, David." My voice was a quiet tremor. "Actually, my name is Eliza Vance." This was my grandfather's house. Susan's smile faltered. Oh, my goodness. Arthur Vance's granddaughter? We had no idea. We bought the cottage from your parents a few weeks ago. The words, though expected, landed like a physical blow. My parents, I repeated numbly. Yes, Richard and Eleanor, David supplied, stepping forward. They told us the property was in a family trust and that handling the sale was too painful for you after your grandfather's passing. They were in a hurry to sell. We hope we haven't overstepped. The lie was so smooth, so plausible, it was almost elegant in its cruelty. They had used my grief as a shield for their greed. Would you like to come in? Susan offered, her voice soft with sympathy. You're welcome to look around. We haven't changed much inside yet. I nodded, unable to speak, and stepped over the threshold. The air inside was different. The familiar scent of old books, wood smoke, and my grandfather's pipe tobacco was gone, replaced by the sterile smell of fresh paint. The worn armchair was missing. The photographs of a young me holding up a trout, of my grandmother on the dock, had been taken down. The walls were bare, waiting for new memories to replace the ones that had been stolen. We have all the paperwork in here, David said, pulling a binder from a drawer. We like to keep everything organized. The title, the deed transfer, all the closing documents. He handed it to me. With trembling hands, I flipped through the pages until I found it, the deed of sale. And there, at the bottom, was my name, scrawled in a careful imitation of my handwriting. It was a near-perfect forgery, but the loop on the E was too tight, the tail of the Z too deliberate. It was the signature of a stranger. Below it was a notary's seal from Deschutes County, miles from where any of us lived or worked. I looked up at the Millers, their kind faces etched with concern. I never signed this, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I never authorized this sale. Susan gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. David looked horrified. We are so sorry, he said, his voice low. We bought this in good faith. We had no idea. I believe you, I managed, my own voice gaining a sliver of strength. But I'm afraid I'm going to have to call my lawyer. Back in my car, parked under the shade of a magnificent Douglas fir that my grandfather had called the Old Man, I finally let the tears come. They weren't loud, racking sobs, but a silent, hot stream of grief and betrayal. My sanctuary had been invaded, my memories auctioned off to fund a party. After a few minutes, I wiped my eyes, took a deep breath, and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Maya Singh had been my college roommate, a fiercely intelligent woman who had gone on to become one of Portland's most formidable real estate attorneys. We hadn't spoken much, but there was a bond of trust there that time hadn't eroded. She answered on the second ring. Eliza? Is everything okay? My voice was steady now, cold as the lake in winter. Maya, it's the cottage. My parents sold it out from under me. I'm looking at the documents right now. My signature is a forgery. There was a moment of stunned silence, then Maya's voice shifted, becoming crisp and professional. Are you absolutely certain? Yes. Okay. Take high-resolution photos of every single page and email them to me right now. Don't talk to your family. Don't do anything else. This isn't just a family dispute, Eliza. This is felony fraud. But we can fix this. We can take it back. As I drove away from Serenity Lake, the familiar road back to the highway felt different. The world looked the same, but the ground beneath my feet had irrevocably shifted. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion, it was a fact, documented in a binder with a forged signature at its heart. They had taken my home. But Maya's words echoed in my mind, a quiet promise of a coming storm. We can take it back. Maya worked with a surgical precision that was both terrifying and deeply comforting. Within hours of receiving my email, she had a plan. The next morning, I was sitting in her clean, minimalist office overlooking the Willamette River, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands as she laid out the anatomy of my family's deceit. The first thing I looked at was the notary, Maya said, tapping her screen. The seal on the deed belongs to a Patricia Kellerman in Bend, Oregon. I called her this morning. Maya paused, her expression grim. Ms. Kellerman was shocked. She's never met you, never notarized a document for anyone in your family. And here's the key, her notary journal and seal were stolen from her car last December. She filed a police report the next day. The seal on your deed is forged using a stolen, reported instrument. That alone is enough to invalidate the sale. A small part of me, the part that had wanted this to be a terrible mistake, finally withered and died. This was premeditated. Maya continued, pulling up the county records. They listed the sale price at $280,000. I frowned. That's incredibly low. The last appraisal 5 years ago was over $400,000. With the way property values have gone up. Exactly, Maya cut in. A lakefront property like that, with its history, should have sold for over $500,000 easily. But they weren't looking for fair market value. They were looking for fast, untraceable cash. They sold it to the first all-cash offer that came along, the Millers, who thought they were getting the deal of a lifetime on a complicated estate sale. She swiveled her monitor toward me. On the screen was a spreadsheet. In one column were the withdrawals from my savings account. In the other were itemized payments. My breath caught in my throat. I saw the names of the vendors Chloe had gushed about: Bella Spasa Couture, Willamette Vineyard Estates, Elon Photographers, Dolce Vita Travel. The amounts matched to the dollar. They hadn't just used the proceeds from the illegal sale of my home, they had emptied my personal savings to cover the deposits. My quiet inheritance, the legacy of my grandfather's love, had been liquidated and transformed into a couture wedding dress, artisanal canapés, and a honeymoon in Tuscany. I leaned back in my chair, a wave of cold fury washing over the grief. It was so much worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just a theft of property, it was a theft of meaning. They had taken something sacred and rendered it profane. All the years of feeling like an afterthought, of being the responsible one who didn't need anything, suddenly coalesced into this one, monumental act of erasure. They saw my most cherished possession not as a home, not as a legacy, but as a resource to be plundered for my sister's extravagant fantasy. Eliza, Maya said gently, pulling me from my thoughts. What they've done constitutes wire fraud, forgery, identity theft, and real estate fraud. We have a mountain of evidence. We can go to the district attorney today. I looked at the spreadsheet, at the cold, hard numbers that represented such a deep and personal violation. The quiet, accommodating girl who always sought to keep the peace was gone. In her place was a woman who was finally, profoundly, done being quiet. What do we do first? I asked, my voice low but unwavering. Maya smiled, a small, fierce thing. First, we file a lease pendens on the property, which will freeze any further transactions. Then, we file a civil suit to have the fraudulent sale overturned. We contact the DA's office with our evidence and open a criminal investigation. We will get your house back, Eliza. And they will be held accountable. I nodded slowly. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of clarity. This was no longer just about a cottage. It was about my voice. For my entire life, I had let it be drowned out by the needs and desires of others. Now, I was going to use it. The week that followed was a blur of legal paperwork and quiet reflection. Maya prepared the official complaints, but I asked her to hold off on filing them. The wedding was just 10 days away. Part of me, the old, conditioned part, recoiled at the thought of blowing up my sister's life right before she walked down the aisle. I didn't want to be the agent of chaos, the bitter sister who brought lawyers to a celebration of love. For 2 sleepless nights, I wrestled with it, the anger warring with a lifetime of ingrained responsibility to keep the family peace. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, the choice was made for me. A friend from work sent me a link to a post on Chloe's Instagram account. It was a photo of the 2 of us as children, sitting on the dock at Stillwater. I was about 10, earnestly showing a 5-year-old Chloe how to bait a hook. She was smiling brightly for the camera. The caption, however, was what stopped my heart. Thinking about my amazing big sister today, Chloe had written. She has always been the quiet, steady force in my life. She taught me to be brave and to follow my heart. In her quiet, selfless way, she has given me the greatest gift of all, sacrificing something precious from her own life so that I could start mine with this beautiful dream wedding. It's the kind of sacrifice only a sister would make. I am so endlessly grateful for you, Eliza. Thank you for making this possible. I read it once, then twice, the words blurring. Sacrificing. Selfless. Gift. It wasn't just a lie, it was a masterpiece of manipulation. She hadn't just accepted the stolen funds, she had woven the theft into a beautiful, poignant narrative of sisterly love, casting me as the willing martyr and herself as the grateful beneficiary. She was preemptively controlling the story, painting my future silence not as shock or pain, but as humble consent. The comments below the post were a chorus of praise. "What an incredible sister," one read. "Chloe, you are so blessed to have that kind of love in your life," said another. An aunt had commented, "Your grandfather would be so proud of you both." My hands began to shake, not with weakness, but with a surge of cold, clarifying rage. They hadn't just stolen my house. They were trying to steal my truth. My pain was being repackaged as their virtue. That was the moment the hesitation vanished. The conflict within me ceased. There was no more debate. I went to my laptop, opened the folder Maya had sent me, and digitally signed every document. I attached a brief, polite email. "Maya, please file everything. First thing tomorrow morning." Then, I opened a new document and began to write. I wrote a clear, factual account for the district attorney. I drafted a formal letter to the wedding venue's legal department, informing them that the funds they had received were the proceeds of a criminal act and were subject to seizure. I did the same for the photographer and the caterer. If they wanted a narrative, I would give them one. But it would be the truth, backed by affidavits, bank statements, and the full, unyielding force of the law. They had mistaken my quietness for weakness. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The day of the wedding arrived, draped in the soft, golden light of a perfect Oregon September. The vineyard estate was breathtaking, a sea of rolling green hills under a vast, cloudless sky. Guests in expensive suits and flowing dresses drifted across manicured lawns, sipping champagne and murmuring compliments about the sheer perfection of it all. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, a polite smile fixed on my face. My dress was a simple, elegant sheath of deep teal, a stark contrast to the frothy pastels and sequins around me. I was an island of quiet composure in an ocean of orchestrated joy. The ceremony was held under a massive oak tree, its branches hung with white roses and shimmering ribbons. When Chloe appeared at the top of the aisle in her Milan gown, a collective gasp went through the crowd. She was radiant, an ethereal vision of bridal perfection. As she floated toward Julian, the drones buzzed discreetly overhead, capturing the fairy tale for posterity. At the reception, held in a magnificent open-air pavilion, the opulence was staggering. A tower of champagne glasses glittered in the setting sun. The band played smooth jazz as waiters served exquisitely plated courses of food I couldn't bring myself to eat. My parents held court at the head table, beaming, accepting congratulations as if they were the architects of all this splendor. When I approached their table, my father clapped me on the shoulder, his face flushed with wine and pride. "There she is," he boomed. "The silent partner in all this beauty. We couldn't have done it without you, Eliza." My mother squeezed my hand, her eyes shining. "Thank you, sweetie, for your generosity. It means the world to us," to Chloe. "I'm just glad I could be here," I said, my voice even. Later, as the stars began to appear, Chloe took the microphone for the bridal toast. The crowd fell silent. "I want to raise a glass," she began, her voice shimmering with emotion, "to my sister, Eliza." She turned her gaze to me, her eyes locking with mine across the dance floor. "You have always been my anchor. You taught me what it means to love selflessly. You gave up something that meant the world to you so that I could have this perfect day, and you never once asked for anything in return." A wave of appreciative murmurs went through the guests. I could feel their eyes on me pitying, admiring. The quiet sister. The good daughter. The martyr. I rose from my seat, my own champagne flute in hand, and offered her a small, serene smile. "Thank you, Chloe," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the stillness. "It truly is an unforgettable day. I hope you enjoy every single moment." I paused, letting my gaze sweep over her, my parents, the entire glittering affair. "And when you get back from your honeymoon, you should all check your mail. There are some letters on their way that you won't want to miss." A flicker of confusion crossed Chloe's face. My father's smile tightened at the edges. But the band struck up a new song, the moment passed, and the spell of the perfect evening remained unbroken. I set my untouched champagne on a passing tray and slipped away into the darkness. I had done what I came to do. I had borne witness. The performance was over. The consequences were already in motion. Today was their fairy tale. Tomorrow would be my reality. The first registered letter arrived at my parents' house at 9:15 a.m. on a Monday, 2 weeks later. They had just returned from dropping Chloe and Julian at the airport for their flight to Italy. My mother signed for the thick envelope, assuming it was a late wedding gift. Inside was a formal notice of civil action, a summons to appear in court, and a copy of the complaint detailing charges of fraud and forgery, complete with exhibits, a copy of the forged deed, the notary's sworn affidavit, and screenshots of my bank records. A second courier delivered a similar package to the office of Julian's father, a man who valued his firm's reputation for integrity above all else. A third arrived at the Willamette Vineyard Estates, placing a legal lien on their final payment. My phone rang just before noon. It was Chloe, calling from a layover in Dubai. Her voice was a high-pitched shriek of disbelief and fury. "What have you done?" she screamed into the phone. "You've ruined everything. We're getting calls from Julian's father, from the wedding planner. There are lawyers involved. How could you do this?" I sat on my quiet balcony, looking out at the city. "I told you to check your mail. You did this to humiliate me. To destroy my marriage." "No, Chloe," I said, my voice calm and clear. "You did this. You and Mom and Dad. You built your wedding on a foundation of lies and theft. I'm just exposing the rot. You're tearing this family apart," she sobbed. "The family was already broken," I replied softly. "I'm just the one who stopped pretending it wasn't." I ended the call. The next one was from my mother, her voice a mixture of pleading and accusation. "Eliza, we can fix this. We can talk about it. You don't have to do this publicly. We're past talking, Mom. You had your chance to talk to me before you hired a handyman to cover your tracks, before you forged my name, before you stole my grandfather's legacy." The conversation was short. There was nothing left to say. In the end, it was swift and brutal. Faced with irrefutable evidence, my parents' lawyer advised them to settle. They had no choice but to agree to all of my terms. The fraudulent sale of Stillwater Cottage was voided. The Millers, who were completely innocent, were compensated for their expenses and trouble from a court-ordered liquidation of my parents' retirement accounts. My parents were required to pay back every cent they had taken from my savings, along with my legal fees. They had to sell their house, the house I grew up in, to cover the costs. The scandal was quiet but devastating in their small community. Friends fell away. Invitations stopped coming. The shame was a shadow that followed them everywhere. Chloe's perfect marriage lasted less than 6 months. Julian's father, furious at the stain on the family name, pressured his son to file for an annulment on grounds of fraud. The life of effortless luxury Chloe had married into evaporated overnight. She moved into a small apartment and took a job in retail. She never spoke to me again. I returned to Stillwater in the late fall, as the leaves were turning to gold and fire. The Miller sign was gone. I walked through the dormy door and the familiar scent of cedar and wood smoke seemed to welcome me home. The house felt empty, hollowed out by the ordeal, but it was mine. Over the next year, I slowly, carefully, brought it back to life. I didn't just repair it, I reclaimed it. I replanted the wildflower garden. I found an old photograph and had a craftsman recreate the hand-carved Stillwater sign. I hunted through antique shops until I found an armchair that was almost identical to my grandfather's. One afternoon, cleaning out his old workshop, I found a small, locked wooden box I'd never seen before. The key was tucked away in a jar of old screws. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not a tool, but a letter in my grandfather's hand. My dearest Eliza, it read. If you are reading this, it is because you have had to fight for this place. I suspected you might. Some people see a quiet spirit and mistake it for a weak one. Never let them. This cottage is made of wood and nails, but your spirit is made of something far stronger. Remember that. You are the keeper of the quiet, and that is a rare and powerful thing. Don't ever be afraid to make some noise to protect it. With all my love, Arthur. Tears streamed down my face as I read his words. He had known. He had always seen me. I placed the letter on the mantelpiece, beside a photo of him. The house was no longer just a sanctuary, it was a testament. A story of loss, but also of reclamation. I don't know if my family will ever heal. Some things, once broken, can't be put back together in the same way. But as the sun set over Serenity Lake, casting long shadows through the tall pines, I sat on the porch and felt a sense of peace that was deeper than any I had ever known. It was the peace of a quiet spirit that had finally learned to roar. I had lost my family, but in the process, I had found myself. And I was home.